Learn to write Friday in calligraphy, starting with brush pen calligraphy. There are lots of different ways you could do the letters in calligraphy, but this is just a fun, simple style for the letter F. And I want you to take a look at the example above where I've got color changing strokes. So everywhere that I change the color is where I'm lifting my pen. And it also helps you see where the strokes go into each other. For example, the I is going to end a little bit short so that as I create the oval of the D, excuse that little mistake, it's going to line up seamlessly with the edge of the oval. And then same thing with the stem of the D, I want to start it so that I come straight down along the slant angle and match up with the edge of that oval. If I'm going to make a mistake, I usually start my stem too far to the right, and then it doesn't match up nicely. So I've been working on that recently, not to start too far to the right. That was better than the last time I did it, but that's all you can do is improve each time. And here's how you can write Friday in modern brush pen calligraphy. Next, I'll show you how to write in faux calligraphy. So using the same style, but using a regular pen, I'm going to write out the base of the word using this regular pen, whatever you have, without all of the thick and thin strokes. We're just going to write it like normal. Still lifting up my pen between each stroke, still trying to line up those strokes so that it looks like a seamless connection, and you can always go back and touch it up if you need, but don't forget this is hand lettering, so it's okay if it's not 100% perfect. Okay, then we're going to go back in and thicken those downstrokes by adding a second line next to the stroke that you've already drawn, anywhere where it comes down. If you have a horizontal stroke or an upstroke, you're going to leave it alone. Like this R comes up and then around to the right, and here it comes down. The I is a downstroke. You could turn the dot into a little circle if you'd like. Anywhere that you have a curve, such as inside an oval, you'll sort of taper that downstroke. Same with here, we're gonna come down and taper it towards the baseline. And try to be a little more careful and slow on this. I'm going a little bit too quickly. As I can see, I've already made a couple mistakes where I kept drawing the downstroke too far, and now it's showing up at the bottom of the stroke. So try not to do that. And then you could either leave this open or go back and fill it in with the same color, a different color, or a pattern. Let's use a brush pen to write the capital block style. So for this, I'm going to use the same exact brush pen I used and make my letters a little bit smaller in height, writing them in a loose capital style with thin upstrokes and thick downstrokes. The A is tricky. We want to start the A at the baseline and come up and then down instead of doing it like this. And you can definitely apply this to your own handwriting style. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine. For Friday in bounce lettering, I'm going to make the F have start like this. I like to make a bigger loop on the R. And the R is also a good one to dip below the baseline. You don't have to alternate perfectly, but I find that alternating which strokes go below the baseline is a good way to keep balance. So like in this instance, this part of the D is above the baseline, this part's below, above, below, above. And of course, there's some places where it's not going to be exact, but if you're having trouble with balance, that's one thing you can take a look at. Maybe this Y could just, looks a little bit too big. There, that's a little more simple. And another cool thing about your iPad is that you can move letters around. So I'm going to select that F, and it looks like it actually could be a little bit bigger and maybe moved out a little bit. Now, one note, if you make things too big, oops, if you resize things to make them much bigger than you initially drew them, they're going to get a little blurry on the edge. So if you do need something to be much bigger, you could always just get rid of it and try it again. That looks like it's going to be way too far away from my word. Okay, that looks better, and then maybe I can grab it and scoot it a little bit closer, like that. So that's one way you could do Friday with bounce lettering on an iPad. Now let's write Friday in Copperplate. So the F is actually exactly the same as the T, except it will also have a little crossbar through it. So again, the stem is 2.5 spaces tall instead of 3, which would be a normal stem for a different letter that uses a capital stem. So I'm making this oval, and then I'm coming down and back up, so the top kind of ends up being wavy, and then crossing through the stem with a crossbar here. You might have noticed that I lifted so that I didn't drag through the ink that's on the stem. That could just create a blob if you drag through the wet ink. So you want to use the guidelines to help be consistent and touch all the letters to the header line and the baseline. Right now I'm using marker paper over a guideline, so it's a little bit harder to see than if you were just writing directly onto the guide sheet. I noticed my eye ended up being a little bit short. It should have come down just a tiny bit lower to touch the baseline here. Another chance to practice this lowercase d. If you ever notice that you're having trouble with a specific letter, you can always just isolate that letter and just practice that one letter over and over until it becomes more consistent. So I lifted here at the baseline after I made the shade of the compound curve of the Y. Descending loop and lift, and then an exit stroke again so I don't drag through the wet ink that's here on the stem. Now let's flourish Friday with a brush pen. I'm using marker paper on top of a guide sheet, which is why you can see this paper clip here. I usually like to paper clip it in 2 spots just so that it stays. So for Friday, I'm going to start with the stem, and then I'm going to write a couple of letters before I add the flourish. I know that I'm probably going to add a flourish on the on the R, so I'm going to leave that open. Instead of connecting it directly to the I, I'm using an entrance stroke to go into the I just because that helps me keep the spacing pretty consistent. And then I'm just going to finish writing D, A, and the Y with the opportunity to add a flourish on the Y. So I'm going to make something kind of similar to what we did in the T, but instead of connecting it into an H, I'm just going to make this shape. So it's going to come down and back up, and just basically making this bigger and more extended over the top of the word. Then I'm going to add in my crossbar just to make sure it looks like an F and not a T. Then I'm going to make a pretty basic flourish underneath the R, adding a little bit of shade right here just for some interest. And then finally, I'm going to make a pretty normal loop on the Y and then go into a flourish that comes up above the word here like this. I'm actually going to see what it looks like if I extend this even more into another wave. So part of flourishing is just experimenting because there really isn't just one way to do it, but I like how that looks here. It creates an interesting shape right there. Now I feel like this part over here is not very balanced, and I wonder if adding something over here would help. So I'm just going to go for it and add another wave that comes out to the left over here, and then maybe add a terminal dot on the F. So I showed before I did Sunday that I had a little bit of a plan over here of what I was going to do for each letter, and that one deviated pretty far from the plan, so I'm just going to try one more time just to show you another variation that's a little bit more similar to what I originally planned out, just to see what it looks like. So here's another way you can flourish Friday with a brush pen. This one has a little bit of spacing issues right here where it's too wide in between these areas in the negative space right here, especially if you compare it to the rest of the word. But just wanted to show you another option for different flourishes you can use for these letters. Let's write Friday in Spencerian. Now you can make the F two ways. You can either do it the same as the T and then have a little crossbar through it, or I'm going to show you another way you can do it. You can connect it directly from the stem into the crossbar. And then in this one, we'll make a little loop up here. When you're connecting letters together in Spencerian, there's a connective slant. So we have the 55-degree main slant for the letters, but then we also have the connective slant. So this slant right here is 55. I'm sorry, it's 52. I think I said 55 before. It's 52 in Spencerian. And then the connective slant, which connects the letters together, is actually 35 degrees. And that's how you write Friday in Spencerian. Thanks for watching our series on how to write the days of the week in calligraphy. Let us know in the comments which style is your favorite, and check out the blog post at lovelyloops.com to see pictures of all of these styles, as well as more helpful tips and free resources. Thanks again, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.